Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of Crafting with Cosplay Fabrics. My name is Indra and today I want to talk to you about how to make your costume last a long time, how to store them, what to choose for them so that they are costumes that will be with you for a very long time, but also what do you do when it's time to get rid of costumes. So let's get to it. I've been cosplaying for a really long time, almost 18 years. So I have a lot of experience with materials that are not so great to materials that are amazing like cosplay fabrics, but also having the knowledge and making all sorts of different costumes to really understand what works, what doesn't work. So I really wanted to share that with you. First thing is picking materials that are going to last you a long time. I understand that sometimes we make things that are just for like photos, like a quick thing, nothing that you think that you'd wear more than once. And I think that is also very telling of how long you're willing to keep that costume for. But if you have an intention of keeping your costumes for a long time, try to pick stuff that is going to last you for a very long time. The two fabrics that will, I guess, break apart the easiest for anyone are anything having to do with like special finishes like metallics, vinyls, pleathers, all of those because of the way that they are made. If your costume has pieces like these, then I suggest either choosing really nice, actual like good materials. I of course highly recommend the Cosplay Fabrics. I can tell you from personal experience that those fabrics last so long, and also things like metallics and things like that they will last you a very long time, but they tend to, depending on how you store them, they kind of can stick, or some of the metallic finish on them can rub off. So you want to choose materials that won't have any of that scuffing happening to them, or also having some of those same metallics but that have a gloss on top so that it's almost like a protective coat on top. So make sure that when you are deciding to make a costume, especially big costumes, that you decide to use materials like these. So you may be asking, how do I know if it's a good material or not? Obviously, it's kind of play with it, see what happens, Russian roulette in many cases, especially if it's fabrics that you are purchasing from a random vendor or a place that you're not sure of, or it might be a hand-me-down or a random fabric that you find. It happens. A lot of times you can test this out by adding glues to them, applying heat to them, stretching it really far, and seeing how the fabric stands up to those stress tests. If you feel like it's got a little wonky, then you're more than likely handling a fabric that will not stand the test of time, especially, like I mentioned, things having to do with stretch, pleather, or any specialty finishes, any metallics or anything like that. And you can even like rub it or rub the fabrics together and see how that also reacts. It's very normal for certain fabrics, especially things like, for example, the oil slick or things like that, that over time it will like rub off, but at least it's the finish that's coming off and not the actual fabric coming completely apart, which is also a good sign of really well made fabrics, so that the integrity of the fabric is still good even though the finish might not stay there. Some other fabrics that have that sort of finish that aren't I guess as nice fabrics, you will find that they feel slimy almost, and they kind of like stick to each other, or they kind of crumble, especially with things like pleathers. So try to look out for those types of things, especially doing little stress tests on them. And of course, if you're purchasing from like a major retailer or anything like that, then you can of course check and see what people say about it, look at reviews, or even ask some friends if they worked with it in the past, or if you have any luck finding someone who has made the same costume as you, asking them what fabrics they use and if they had seen any issues with the fabrics that they had used. So those are things that have helped me as far as trying to pick the best fabrics for my costumes. But I understand that sometimes it happens that you kind of have to just do with what you have, or sometimes you can't find the right color, so you have to decide to use something that isn't as high quality. If that is the case, then try to make those pieces, if you feel like it's something that could potentially fall apart, make that so that it's easily removable or replaceable, or something that you can kind of pin together or snap together so that it's sort of like a removable piece that eventually you can just exchange for a new fabric. Obviously this is a lot more work, but just things to consider if your idea is to keep your costume for a very, very long time, because it all starts with materials. The second thing is how you store your costumes. Obviously the best way all around is to keep your costumes in a dry, cool place, especially if you have a big closet space where you can just store your costumes, and if you can keep them inside garment bags and have all of your pieces stored neatly and separately as possible. But some costumes don't do so well with being just like hanging up. Some have to actually be stored completely flat or in between like sheets of paper, or some that you might not have the space to store them inside of a closet, so you have to do with maybe a garage or something like that. If you have to store your costume in a garage, that's been my case for the most part, I recommend storing them in plastic bins. I try to not use huge bins, so that way the costumes don't get weighed down by trying to like fit as many of them in a bin as possible. But I have found that that's been the best solution, especially throughout the years, because that tends to keep humidity out for the most part. You also, if you can use a dehumidifier and just kind of keep that near where you keep your costumes. And you can find that online for very cheap, and just make sure that you're constantly like throwing whatever receptacle where it kind of sucks up all the water. Just make sure you change that out as often as possible. But I have found that that actually makes a world of difference, and it'll keep humidity and mold out of your costumes. And always make sure that you're checking on the stuff that you have stored, so that it's not sticking together, or that it's not creating any problems like within the costumes. Because sometimes we wear costumes, we sit on them, we don't really clean them, and then we store them. You know, that's something that younger me, when I was starting to cosplay, I didn't realize, you know. So that brings me to another point, which is cleaning your costumes. Whenever you wear your costumes, make sure that before you store them, that they are completely dry, that you have washed off any sort of like deodorant or anything like that that could potentially cause mold in your costumes. When you're storing them, make sure that if they have any particular pieces that could be you know, glued together or stuck together or anything like that, that you're putting either I like using just wrapping paper, like the tissue paper, just in between them and just storing them. If your costume has any sort of embellishment that is relatively heavy, especially any sort of beading or anything like that, it is much better for you to store your costume as flat as possible. This is because when you hang your costumes, if they have any weight to them, the fabric will start to distort, and throughout time then your costume is not going to fit the same way, and you might not be able to even wear your costume. So try to keep these things in mind when you are both making them and storing them. I know how difficult it is, and sometimes you just kind of throw stuff after you've worn them, you just kind of throw them in a corner and it's done. But that brings me to my next point, which is when do you get rid of costumes? This one's a little bit tough, because you know, once you've worked on something for a while, it's really difficult to kind of let go of them. And especially if you have any sort of sentimental like feeling towards your costumes, it is very difficult to kind of let them go. So some things that I have found that really help are to really look at them objectively and see if, first of all, if they are damaged at all. And if there are some salvageable pieces, then that's something that you can kind of put to the side. If that's something that you've already done, but you haven't touched that, repaired that in a very long time, then that should be a little bit telling of the fact that you don't really plan on doing that, or it might not be of interest anymore. So that might be just a small clue into, should I get rid of this costume? That's just something that has helped me kind of figure out and be objective about, you know what, I haven't touched this in a really long time. I don't really care for it anymore, and I really don't think I'm gonna repair it, so I'm just gonna get rid of it. And the other thing is, if you feel like your costumes don't really interest you anymore, or if it's outfits that they don't fit you anymore, they might be too small or too big on you, so that might be also a way to just look at them objectively and just think like, okay, I don't need these anymore. Of course, if they mean something to you, no matter what they look like, no matter the state that they're in or how they fit you, of course, keep those costumes. I have many of them like that myself. That is just nice to kind of look back on. So definitely make sure that you are at least storing those as best as possible. So once you have decided which outfits you're going to get rid of, then you can start to separate them into what you can sell, what you can give away or donate, or what you can just throw away. Of course, I always suggest that if you have any pieces of your costumes that you can salvage, that you can maybe recycle, maybe stuff that you can use into other costumes, absolutely do that. I take apart my old costumes all the time, and if I see that there are pieces that maybe a friend can use, I'll give them that. Or if it's completely like there's no way that it can be used again, then I just actually throw them away. Of course, whenever possible, recycling pieces. And sometimes it's a little bit difficult to just donate costumes, especially to like a thrift store or things like that, because a lot of handmade costumes really don't make it to the I guess show floor, and unless they are made a certain way or if they are recognizable characters. So in that case, you're better off trying to see if maybe there's a newer cosplayer or someone who can trade that costume, or that you can give it to them. And there are a lot of Facebook groups, even selling groups and stuff like that online that you can find where people actually trade or sell their used costumes. So that might be something to look into. But if you see that none of those boxes get checked, then just it's time to throw it away. And I know that it can be very difficult to part with costumes, but after a long time, some of them that's just what happens. I've had costumes that I love them very much, and I would have very much loved to wear them again, but they just didn't stand the test of time, and they were actually falling apart. So there was no way I could salvage pieces for other costumes or give it away to somebody, or even like donate it anywhere, because they was falling apart. So all I could do was just throw it away, which is heartbreaking, but it's just something that happens. So take these things into consideration when you're making your costumes. And it is okay to use a costume once. It is absolutely okay to use the same costume over and over and over again. So sometimes you might think that you are making something just for like a quick photo or something, and then you end up loving it so much that you end up re-wearing it. So keep these things in mind for if your costume is not done with the best materials, then go to the next part, which is storing them the best way that you can. And when it's time, then knowing to either repair it, make a new one, or get rid of it. So I know that this is very wordy, but I know that that's something that can be a little bit difficult to kind of figure out because it's a lot of information. So thank you for listening to my whole spiel about it, but I do hope that it is helpful for you. I tried to really break it down, and I made so many notes to try and figure out the best points to tell you. So I hope that you find that useful, and I hope that that helps you with your next costume build. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you like and subscribe, and I will see you soon for another tip, trick, or tutorial featuring Cosplay Fabrics.